Hi, nice to meet you all. In this video, we're going to walk through a sample adventure game project together. First, let's see what we can do in the project. Go ahead and click play. Here we'll see that we have the option to start a new game or continue from a previous save. I'm going to go ahead and start a new game. Here we'll see we can interact with different NPCs. And they have dialogue to go alongside them. We can go through the portal. There's also a box here. It seems like we can interact with it, so let's go ahead and do that. If I open up my inventory with the I key, I can see that we have an inventory system here that picked up that merry-go-round. And finally, we'll see that we can save the game by pressing E on these different books. So now let's go ahead and see if that actually works. Let's go ahead and relaunch that game. And if I click continue, you'll see that I loaded right back to where we were. So we're going to learn as follows. Please feel free to skip around. If there's something you already understand, we really recommend that you kind of jump around this video for the different features that you would like to learn. The first thing that we're going to talk about is kind of generic map editing. And then next we're going to talk about how you can move the character's position around. And then next we're going to talk about our NPC dialogue that we saw earlier, how to interact with different entities in your world, so like that chest for example, how to use the inventory system of course, and then learn quests because what's an adventure without a good quest, and then learn about MapleStory World's event system because it comes in handy a lot with projects like these. And finally, I want to learn and teach you guys how to use the load and save data feature. Let's get started learning. Let's learn how to edit our world environment. So to note, there are a few different modes within MapleStory Worlds that we can use. The default one when you first create a map is going to be what we call Maple Tile mode. And if you're familiar with traditional MapleStory, we'll go ahead here and open up that tile editor. You'll see that we kind of have this side view where if I spawn the player, let's go ahead and create a spawn location really quickly. We gotta create a world. We'll call this our test world. And you'll notice that we can move from side to side. Now there are a couple of other modes as well. So for example, we're gonna go ahead and switch this map over to a rectile map. You'll see here, we have a slightly different mode. First, you're going to want to create a tile set. We're going to use a pre-existing one. You'll have to save it as well. So here we'll see, we can create it our tile set. And you'll see here, now we can go ahead and draw these on the screen. And what you'll immediately start to notice is that these paint, and they are kind of like a top-down view over the player. So we can kind of see that in action here. And now there's one more view that we'll go ahead and take a look at, another Maple Tile mode. This one is very similar to the normal Maple Tile mode, but it uses the same custom tiles. It's called Side View Rectile Map. We're going to go ahead and load this. And you will see now we can draw here as well, except when we load into the world, we're going to go ahead and want to delete this because we are going to fall just like how we were in that side view mode, the Maple Tile mode earlier. So let's go ahead and I want to keep drawing really quick. I want to draw the floor here. There we go. I forgot to do something important with this. So you'll notice here that when we open up our tile editor again really quickly, you'll see here there's this little like kind of green cross here with arrows in different directions. We want to actually make this tile impassable. This works on both tile modes, but for now this is the only way we can actually walk on these. So let's do that really quickly. And we'll see here, now we have our custom tiles and we're moving side to side. But for the majority of this adventure game project, we're going to be using that traditional Maple Tile map. That lets us use all these presets, and We're gonna go ahead and take a look at this a little bit more as well. Let's go to our tiles. And I want to select something kind of grassy for ours. So let's go ahead and select this. And so you'll notice that this one, because it's using the MapleStory assets, it's going to go ahead and kind of understand what you're doing. So here, like I built a little slope and it's going to automatically adjust the tiles to be textured that way. You'll notice when I build a wall, you will actually see the wall as well. And again, you can also see the footholds. So if I turn this off, the footholds will go away. If I turn this back on, you'll see those footholds again. You'll also see the kind of wall as like a very up and down line for the foothold. Let's go ahead and drag our player so we can go ahead and stand back there. So here we can go ahead and see, okay, we're hitting the wall. We see we have all this different collision and stuff like that. Another thing I want to cover is the basic controls here. Here we can kind of paint just directly on the map like so. Think of this as like a paintbrush and the tiles are our paint. And then here we have a paint box. So here I can drag and drop a box and create a whole very organized box of tiles. Additionally, we can go ahead and see here, we can select the eraser, or we can actually just right click on the tiles, but I like to use the eraser. And then we also have the option to use our paint box or our paint line. Cool. So now let's kind of think about how the character actually interacts with our map. So if I go ahead and click play again here, we'll see by default, the character will actually be able to move around, and this is synced in multiplayer too. We have our jump, we have our move speed. Now let's kind of look at where all that stuff actually comes from. What we're looking for here is our rigid body component. We can actually go ahead and search this, so let's do that. We'll see here, yeah, our rigid body component. We have our mass. If you're familiar with physics, like our mass is going to be how heavy our player is. So this can affect certain things, like if I turn this way up, let's turn this really high, you'll see that we have a little bit more momentum after we stop. So let me turn this back down to 100. You'll see that we stop much quicker now. So this kind of determines like how much inertia that player has. I won't go through every single one of these, but I will go over a couple of really important ones. This is going to be our maximum speed that we can walk left and right. Let's go ahead and change that back down to 1. And then our walk acceleration, how fast do we get up to that speed? So right now, this kind of goes hand in hand with mass, but this is specifically talking about how fast we'll speed up. If I turn this up, you'll notice that we hit our max speed almost instantly now. Now if I turn this way down, like to here, it takes us a little bit more wind up time to reach that maximum speed. There we go. And then the walk drag is going to be the opposite of that. How long is it going to take us to go back to no speed at all when we stop pressing any input on our keyboard? There's a couple of other different important settings here, like our fall speed, how far and fast is the player going to fall. And there's a couple of other important things here. We won't go into all of them now, but I recommend you read the documentation on these. Next up, let's go ahead and learn about sorting layers. Let's go ahead and get out of play and back onto our map. If we toggle the tile editor once again, we will see, click on our map really quickly. We can go to panels, and then you'll see here, if it's not on your screen by default, there is the map layers. Let's go ahead and drag that down here. So currently everything on our map is on layer 1. But if we go ahead and create a new layer, you can go ahead and see, and you can kind of draw on. And this layer 2 right now, you'll see it's on top of layer 1. So everything is going to show up on top. Let's kind of delete all of this. We don't want all of this here. But let's go ahead and create a bridge between these two layers. One thing you'll note is that there's a lot of important behavior around how we switch between these layers. Like you'll see here, I don't actually switch until I jump onto the new layer. That's something that's really important to note. So until you're on this layer, physically, none of the walls will really register. It'll be like you're behind the wall or in front of the wall. So something to keep in mind. You can take a look at our rectile video or one of our introduction videos to kind of see more physics behind what the player collides with. But let's go ahead and see how our player now is going to be on that layer 2 now. You'll see our avatar render is on layer 2, and then we're standing here. We're gonna have to go ahead and reload what it's looking at, and then now it's gonna be at layer 1. So layer 1, and then we see layer 2. So something to keep in mind when you are building your world. Also, all decorations and stuff can also be on these layers as well. Anything that will render stuff outside of UI is going to have to pick a layer. We recommend that you only have about 10 layers max on a map at once. You can go beyond this, of course, but for optimization reasons, that's kind of the hard per map recommendation that we have. And now let's move on to the next thing. So the next thing I want to talk about is teleportation in MapleStory worlds. There's a couple different ways to get our player around the map. We can either teleport the player, use a portal, or we can move their position around. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you and walk you through all 3 of those different methods. So the first one is the teleport service. If we go ahead and look through here, this is one of the native scripts, so that means it comes with every MapleStory project you're gonna make. You're gonna have access to this at all times. And there's a couple of really useful functions in here. I recommend you look at the documentation and take a look through all of them, but we're gonna focus on 2 in particular. The first one is teleport to entity. This is really straightforward. We're gonna have a target entity. So this is gonna be, if you're teleporting the player, for example, this is going to be the player. And then we have a destination entity. So for example, this might be something on the other side of the map that you want to teleport the player to, or something on a different map actually works as well. So if you want to teleport the player to a different map. We also have the teleport to entity path. So here, if we take a look, it's got the same kind of first target entity parameter, but for the string, we have a destination entity path. So this is going to take the same thing, except you can use a entity path. So for example, if I were to go to our map, I can copy the entity path, and that's something I could use as well. And as another quick note, we have the teleport to map position. So here we still have that target entity, but we have a destination position and a destination map name that we could use as well. There's a couple of other things in here for things like instance rooms and stuff like that. But for now, those are the very simple functions we're going to focus on. So here, if we go ahead and look at our teleport logic, when the player loads into a new game, you're going to see all of that stuff set up here. So teleport player for new game, they're going to go ahead and teleport to the spawn location. Or if they're continuing a game, they're going to go ahead and teleport to their last position. Next up, we have the teleport portals. So if we go to a portal component, this is again something kind of native to MapleStory worlds. If we go ahead and open up one of our portals, so going back to the map, let's go to the tutorial stage really quickly. We'll see here we have this portal. If we look at that portal component, you'll see kind of like that teleport to map entity, we have something like that. It kind of is the same thing in practice. You're going to set that destination, but instead of calling a function, you have a component you can go ahead and add. And then if you've used a portal in MapleStory worlds, you generally know that you can press the up key, whatever that's set to teleport through that, as we kind of have a little indicator here. So we have that up arrow that's going to set and automatically handle the interaction for us, just as a little preset to make things easier. So that's the second way we can teleport the player, it's through portals. And the third way that we can move our player is, of course, through literally moving their position. So if we go ahead and teleport back to our title screen so we can go ahead and run the game, and I click new game, we're going to go ahead and see that I go here. We always know that the players are going to be their player IDs here. And there's going to be a little bit of bugginess because you would of course want to change this on the server, not the client. but you can go ahead and see here that we can also adjust the position as well. Of course, because I'm changing it on the client and not the server, there's going to be a couple of issues there. That would be something that you would want to move on the server. And that's it for the teleportation and moving the player around. So now we're going to dive into how dialogue works in MapleStory Worlds. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and look at is, let's go ahead and run the project and then kind of see if we can navigate our way through how dialogue works in this project. So I'm going to go ahead and click play and then new game. And then we're going to talk to Stan. So first you're going to see I'm going to have to walk up and interact with them. And we'll talk about how interactions work in a minute, but first we're just going to focus on the dialogue. So I press E and then we have a dialogue pop up. So he says, hey, I'm seeing your face for the first time. Are you from here? And then he gives us an item at the end. So how does that work? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at our guy's Stan. So if we go to our NPC group, we'll see him in here. And let's take a look at his components. How is he actually doing this? So the first thing we'll notice is he has some interaction components. He has this interaction component here, and we'll talk about what this does in a moment, but he has the interaction object component, which is our custom interaction component. And we'll see here specifically, we're calling the dialogue. So what is calling the dialogue actually doing? Well, we've set up this entity called dialogue UI. Okay, so we have dialogue UI, and then we're sending it an event, which we'll also talk about how that works. Show dialogue event. Let's go ahead and go over to our UI then. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in our UI editor. So you can go here to go to our UI editor. And I'm going to go to our dialogue. Let's actually back out of this really quickly and go back to our map. Let's go to dialogue UI. And we will see that we have this basic text that just says test all over the place just so we can see it filled up. And this is our sample dialogue, and we'll see that we have a dialogue UI controller. We have something to kind of handle click events. So it'll say here, update next dialogue. That's just showing us that we can click and we can go to the next dialogue. We have handle show dialogue event. So now we have another component that we're introducing here. We'll see we have that dialogue logic. Now we finally figured out where we have our kind of key component to our dialogue logic. So we've kind of followed up the train. So we've interacted, that interaction is sending an event to this UI. And then now that this UI has this event, we're calling something called the dialogue logic. And that's how we're referring to our actual dialogue, so we know what dialogue is next. So let's go ahead and take a look at that dialogue logic. So if I go ahead and search here, we'll see we have dialogue logic. So we have a function to initialize our dialogue. So we'll see here, we are getting a table called dialogue data. So we go ahead to the dialogue data and we'll see here, oh, right. Character Stan says 3 lines. You can see that dialogue ID is here, and we can see that it has text ID. So that dialogue ID is the ID for the entire conversation. So this is what I want you to kind of look at and use if you're going to just set it up. If you want to understand it more in depth, I recommend that you kind of read through the dialogue logic, but if you just want to get it working, this is what you're going to need to know. So the dialogue ID, this is just going to be the ID for the entire conversation. So this entire conversation is under the same dialogue ID. Then we have the name ID, so this is going to be the character. Maybe the same conversation has different characters talking back and forth, so this might not be one-to-one with the dialogue ID. And then we have the text ID. It's a little hard to see here, but if I click through, it's going to be 1, 2, and 3, and this is going to be the different text for the conversation. So now that we have that text ID, we're going to go ahead and see if we go to our dialogue localized data, that's where these text IDs are actually being referred to. So here we have our key that we saw earlier. So if I go to that dialogue data, this is going to match this. And then because this project was natively a Korean project, the source text is in Korean. And then we'll see here that we can actually have our English output here. So let's add a line really quick and see if it registers up. So I'm going to right click and add a row after. We know it's going to be a part of the same dialogue tree. I'm just going to extend the dialogue conversation. So I'm going to paste that tutorial, copy and paste that character. And then we're going to copy and paste this, except we want Stan to say one more line, and it's going to be the fourth thing that he says. Okay, we just got to save that. And then we are going to go to our dialogue localized data, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to add a row after. I'm going to go ahead and paste that same key and change it to 4 again. The source text. I'm actually going to be reading from the source text because our source is Korean. So this can be honestly anything for this example. I'm just going to set it to NA. Same with the note. This is just so you understand what the conversation is about. And the Korean is going to be not available as well. And then our English, we can just go ahead and say, hey, testing. And now if we run the project, we should be able to see everything work correctly. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. Now that we've added that dialogue, let's see our NPC now have that extra line of dialogue. Hey, we'll see that he goes ahead and says this new line, hey, testing. Well, great. We've learned how to kind of add dialogue for a character. Let's go ahead and try to make a new dialogue from scratch. So let's go ahead and go over to our tutorial stage. Yes, I want to move to the tutorial map. We're gonna go ahead and make a clone of our NPC Stan here. Let's rename this guy Character Stanley. He's gonna have a very similar name, and he's gonna function very similarly. We have in this interaction component, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but the key thing here is that we have our interact object component with our interaction type set to dialogue and our target ID. So this is the dialogue ID to be tutorial 001. But we want this to be something new. So let's call this Stanley, and then we'll call this 001. So let's go to our dialogue data again, and we're gonna add a new dialogue. So we gotta set that dialogue ID. So dialogue ID is going to be set to Stanley and then 001. So now we'll want to see that our IDs match up. So let's go to our NPC group again, check Stanley, sees Stanley 001, and then we go back to our dialogue data, Stanley 001. So there's also different character names. So if we go to our character name data here, this has some different information about the character. So if I go to the dialogue data, you'll see here the character is being loaded from here. This is just another localization for the name. If we go ahead and add a character Stanley, let's go ahead and copy this. The source isn't really relevant here because we are doing an English source. There's also some localization settings you can set up too for different languages. I won't be covering that in this one, but you can go ahead and look through the project and through our localization documentation and set that up as well. No notes here, we're just making Stanley. Korean, we're just gonna go ahead and put the same name and then add Stanley. So perfect, now we have a new character named Stanley. Let's go to our dialogue table again. And now we can add our character Stanley. So now we have this name ID set. Now let's set our text ID. Let's say Stanley has 2 lines of dialogue. Go ahead and add Stanley, and then we'll set this to be the dialogue sequence 1. And this will just be part 1, and then this will be part 2. I'm just keeping the same format as made by the demo project, but feel free to set up whatever makes sense to you. So now let's go to the localized data, and we're going to add those 2 lines here. So I already have one copied, luckily. So let's go ahead and do that. This one's going to be number 2. Keep it in order. The source is set up to be Korean by default, so I'm just going to kind of keep that. And we're going to pretend as if it's translating to English from Korean. So let's add that dialogue into here. And then what is Stanley going to say? He's just going to welcome you on your journey. welcome, and then he's gonna wish you good luck. Awesome. Now, if we did everything correctly, which we aren't entirely sure yet, let's go ahead and click play. And then, oh, we need to start this from our title screen. So let's go over to our title map. And then if we press on play, new game. Okay, so we have Stan. We also have Stanley. Wow, he welcomes you to the game, and then he wishes you good luck. So that's how you can set up dialogue within our sample project. I recommend you take a look. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment, and hopefully we can get to that. So now I want to go ahead and take a look at our interaction functionality. This is going to be a little bit of an extension of that dialogue. So the only way to trigger that dialogue currently is through an interaction. So let's go ahead and try to set up an interaction from scratch now. So we went ahead and made Stanley, but let's try to make Stanley look a little bit different from Stan this time. Let's go back to our tutorial map. And let's delete Stanley for now. Let's go ahead and set up a new generic NPC. Maybe Stanley looks more like a wizard. We'll go ahead and set that up. And we'll see by default, use this preset NPC will have all of these different settings available to us. I'm gonna go ahead and rename him Stanley. Actually, I'd prefer it to be character Stanley. Let's keep the same convention going. And we will see here, our main thing is this interaction component. So we'll see here, currently we have a collider. If you don't know what a collider is, you haven't worked with maybe a previous game engine before, a collider is what we consider this like either a box or in like a 3D space. It can be like a sphere or whatever you want it to be, but it is this area in which an entity or some kind of object enters this area. That's what we call a collision. So here, it's not actually a physical collision. It's more trying to understand that the player has entered this space. So here we can actually adjust the position of the collider. So maybe you want to be able to interact with Stanley all the way from over here. You can make that possible. You can make it very tiny. So let's say we want Stanley to only be able to interact with in this tiny little space. We can do that. We can also change our action key. So when the player is inside of this space, that will let us determine what key needs to be pressed in order to execute the action. Here we'll see the holding duration, how long the key needs to be pressed down for, and then these two settings here, these collider box size, that's what we were editing just previously. So if we go back to our NPC, when you click on edit, it just manually adjusts these. The offset is going to be how far it is from the center, and then the size of the box is going to be the box size. Again, we can also make this something else. We can also go ahead and set it to be a polygon. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. You're going to have a series of points. It's going to be, whoops. Oh, I'm actually editing Stan's right now, which is not what I meant to do. So let's go back to our buddy Stanley and set that to be a polygon. And then if I go ahead and click edit, you can see that we can adjust each of these individual different points. And then of course we have a circle, which is going to be pretty straightforward as well, with just another radius and offset. So let's go ahead and go to our next component here, which is going to be the interaction object component. So if we go ahead and look at this interaction object component. So this is actually a custom function, unlike the interaction component. You'll see here, it has this handle interaction event handler. Again, we'll talk about events a little bit later, but what you need to understand is that that interaction component is calling an event to the entity that Stanley is on. And from that, the interaction object component is reading that event. So it's reading that that's happening. And then there's a couple different settings here. So we have a give item or a dialogue or a save interaction type, but we know this is going to be a call dialogue option. So we can go ahead and set that really quickly. Let's go back to our tutorial, our NPC. Our interaction component is on Stanley, so we can keep that as is. Our interaction type, we know is going to be dialogue. And again, if you ever get confused, you can always go back to the pre-existing character. Also, let's go ahead and drag this in the NPC group just to be consistent. We'll see that NPC Stanley. This actually doesn't even set an interaction component. And you'll see it doesn't really matter too much because it's actually going to be set by default. And this on begin play here, it's going to search for the interaction component on itself, and then we'll actually return an error if it cannot find it. So we don't actually need to set that, but I just want you to understand the entity that it's referring to in the first place. So here we can go ahead and now set the target ID. So we go over to Stanley. That target ID is going to be the dialogue ID that we talked about before. And for us, this is going to be Stanley 001. Assuming I remember that I named it this. And let's go ahead and click play. If everything is done correctly already, we should go ahead and see. Whoops, I forget that we have to go back to our title screen first before we can start the game. So here we can see that we can press E. And he says, welcome, I wish you good luck. So Stanley is still speaking Stanley's dialogue, but you'll notice that there was actually a difference between the two of them. One was actually going ahead and printing his dialogue to say talk to interact. So let's go ahead and go back to our tutorial really quickly. Let's see if we can set it up to be similarly. So let's go to our stand. And we'll see here, action name, UI talk. Let's go ahead and change that to be UI talk as well. You can also adjust a couple of other things here, maybe for Stanley. You could give him multiple animations for talking and set that up as well here in the default NPC stuff. But for now, we just want him to function properly. We again have to go back to our title screen first before we can check his dialogue. So let's do that. So now we see the UI talkie. I should have renamed this just talkie, but you can see that as follows. And so that pretty much covers everything for the interactions. You also saw that there was the option to do the saving as well as gaining an item. So we will cover that in the upcoming topics. So the next topic I'd like to cover is building out an inventory system. To kind of get an idea of what it is we're actually building, let's go ahead and click play. Let's start a new game, and then let's press I. So here we'll see that we have an inventory system. We have a 4x2 grid, but we don't have any items yet. But Stan will give us an item, so let's go ahead and talk to him. And now we'll see that we have an item. If I click on that item, you'll go ahead and see information about that item pops up. So we see this is a ghost candy. We have here the icon for the item, and here we have a description. So now that we kind of understand what this inventory system does, let's see how we would build something like this. First, we're going to go back out, and then we're going to go to our UI tab. So if you're editing UI, just like we were editing tiles before, we have this UI button. And like in the tile editor where we have these map layers, we have something called UI groups. These are basically kind of ways of breaking our UI into separate little pieces that we can have on the screen at certain times. And then also like map layers, maybe you want one group to display over another group. So for now, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the pre-existing UI, and then we're going to try to rebuild that a little bit. So let's go ahead and go to our, I'm not going to enable this yet, our inventory UI. And then let's make this visible. There we go. So we'll see here, we have this broken down into two major pieces. We have the inventory frame. This is the thing that is going to hold all of our different items. And then we have our info frame. This is just holding stuff like the description, the name of the item, and the item icon. So let's go ahead and look at that inventory frame in more detail. You'll see here, we just have a sprite GUI renderer component. This is just kind of loading this like little background. You'll see it's got this like little fade at the top. It's just this sprite box here. And you'll see here, it's actually a slice type. So what that means is that the sprite for the UI is actually taking and trying to preserve these corners while kind of duplicating chunks of this side so that it scales properly. Because normally when you scale an image, it's going to stretch and it's going to get kind of blurry when you extend it. So that's kind of as a prevention method there. You can read the documentation on that as well. So we got the kind of inventory frame, and here you'll see it's kind of just pivoted towards the center. But now we have a exit button. This is pivoted towards the top. It's always going to stay in that top right corner no matter what we do with our inventory frame. And this is just going to be a button component. This button is going to have an event tied to it whenever you click it. And then we'll kind of look at our other component and you can kind of see how it closes. But for now, all you need to know is that we have a button component on here, and then we have our layout. So if you're building an inventory system, I almost guarantee you will always be using this scroll layout group component. This scroll out layout group component lets you select a few different options. For example, we can have a horizontal. And so here, if you were to have multiple items, let's just go ahead and add some really quickly. We'll just add a UI sprite. We'll just add, we'll just add a bunch of these in here. So you'll see here, some of them actually went all the way out here, but what this is doing is it's automatically laying out these different items in this horizontal fashion. But let's say we don't want it to be horizontal, maybe we want it to be vertical, and we want our items to be listed vertically. Maybe we could do that as well. Something you might like to do is build an inventory system where the name is on the side and then up and down, and then you can scroll that way. But as traditional inventory systems are, you're typically going to be using a grid. Now I know it's a little confusing to look at when they're all placed down like this. Usually we might use like a little sprite. What's a good example sprite? Maybe something like this. And then you can kind of faintly see our thing right here. Maybe let's make our inventory frame just a little bit less dark so we can see that more clearly. That's going to be our slot layout. Here it is. We can make it maybe just a little bit more less transparent. But you can see our little item sprites here have now been turned into this grid. So perfect, we've built our grid. But for now, we don't have any items, so let's just delete all of these for now. This is just what would happen if we did have items. You'll see here that by default, when our code actually is adding an item into our inventory, it's going to use this pre-made model. So let's see if we can go ahead and find that really quick. It uses this inventory item slot model. And so each one of those squares that we had before is going to be filled with one of these. And this is just simply this little button component because of course we wanted to click on it with an icon in the center of it. Cool. So now we've kind of covered what our inventory frame has. So let's now look at the info frame. This one's even more simple. There's no advanced components here. We just have an icon frame, which is again using that sprite GUI render component. That image RUID is going to be whatever our sprite is. So for this, it's got that little ghost candy. And here, this is just going to be the name of our item. This is again just another sprite GUI render component for like the little background and stuff. And then if we actually check the children of the name frame, we're going to see that there is a text component here. This you can edit as well. Again, same with the description, simply just a frame and text. So that's kind of the outline. We can kind of make something like that really quickly ourselves. So if I wanted to make a duplicate really quickly, let's kind of remake this from scratch really quick. We'll call this our inventory system. And then let's go ahead and add a UI sprite. Actually, I think I would prefer this to be, let's use something similar to what they had in our previous example. Let's use like this one. It's a very, very faint, but still noticeable kind of transparent layer. And we have it sliced just like we wanted. Now let's add that scroll component, the one that lets you have your grid. We're going to disable the use the scroll bar because we're not going to have enough items to where you would need a scroll. But if you wanted to have that scroll, you can do that. And you can also adjust the settings of the scroll bar as well. So let's add some items in there really quickly. And let's rename this our inventory. We can add some children really quickly. And then I'm going to clone this really quickly so we can kind of see. So you'll see it's automatically trying to see how many of the items it can fit before going to the next row. We can have a fixed column count and then the size will be adjusted, or we can have a fixed row count. And if you have the set to flexible, it's just going to see how many it can fit before going to the next row. But if you have something set like fixed column count, in this case, let's say we have a fixed count of 3, or actually let's do 4. It's going to fill in 4, and then you'll see some of these are kind of stretching out just a little bit too far. If this was a little bit bigger, it's going to try to keep them all the same size still though, but it's going to try to fit 4 in there, and then it's going to move to the next row. Great. So now we can go ahead and start creating our info page. We actually don't need anything except for this scroll layout group component, because like I mentioned, as long as we have these settings set, those items are going to be automatically placed in here from our code that we'll look at in just a minute. So let's create another one. We're going to also create another UI sprite. We're going to make it similarly laid out. Maybe just to be a little interesting, we'll make this one a circle. That sprite doesn't quite scale up well enough, so maybe not. Let's instead use this. Okay, so now we have our item information. Let's go ahead and add in to this. Let's rename this to inventory information. Then we're just going to add an empty, actually let's make it a sprite. So UI sprite. Let's change this to be like this. This isn't the prettiest thing in the world, but it's fine for now. This will be the name of the item. This is going to be the icon. Let's try to make this as close to a square as possible. And then maybe we have another one that has the description here. Here. Awesome. Now we have something that kind of is starting to resemble what we had before. Let's go ahead and make this the name. Make this the icon. Make this the description. Perfect. Now, let's take a look at how our inventory was before. This is an old clone. Let me get rid of that really quick. Our inventory. And so we'll see here, just based off the layout, they have that frame and then they have a child object that's the icon, which again is just going to have a sprite GUI. We have a name text here and then we have a description text. So let's go ahead and try to fill it out similarly. Let's also look at the correct layer. Whatever layer you have selected here is what you're going to be seeing at the current moment. This is the one that we're building out. So now that we've actually kind of built out the layout for our new inventory, let's go ahead and add in some text. You could also create a text component, but for this example, it actually uses something we call a text GUI render component. The only difference here is that this has a couple of different options that you can use on top of the normal text component. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to rename this text so it's more obvious. And we'll do the same for the description really quickly. So now that we've done that, we need to add an icon for the image. So this will just be a normal UI sprite. And just so we know what it looks like a little bit, let's go ahead and throw in a sword. This will be automatically changed by the code, which we'll talk about in just a second. So now that we have our inventory like UI kind of built out, we need to actually connect it all together. So in our example project, not by default in MapleStory Worlds, but just in this project, we have something called a UI inventory controller. This is just a custom component built to kind of manage our inventory. So let's go ahead and add that to the base UI group. That's just how it's set up. Let's go ahead and throw that in there. And then we need to assign these different components in the respective areas. So the info inventory is going to be, we scroll down, the information. The slot layout is just talking about like our different item slots. So that's the one on the right here. So that's our normal inventory. The item frame icon is just looking for the UI sprite. Be careful not to pick this one because this one is actually the border of our icon. So let's pick that one. Our frame name, let's go ahead and select that one. And then our description. Now that we have all of these set, we can go ahead and get started. So if we click play now, you will see start our new game, and all we have to do is press I. Okay, we'll see that our inventory layout has automatically populated with those 8 different elements. Let's go ahead and press E. Okay, he gave us an item. Now, one thing we'll notice is that there is still a little bit left we have to configure. So we were able to actually get the item, but the item doesn't actually interact. So first we have to go ahead and go to our inventory item slot, and then we're gonna have to change this to be the name of whatever we named our group. You can see that I've already done this, but now once you launch as well, and you go to new game, get that item that we just gotten already, and then we click on this, you'll see that it also brings up our new information page that we've already custom set up. And that's how you kind of figure out all of the UI for the inventory. Now we have to figure out how are we actually getting this item. That's what we'll cover next. So there's a few different things that we're going to take a look at. Of course, we know items exist. So where did they exist? Where does that data exist in the first place? So for the system that we have set up in this example project, we actually have a data set that contains item IDs. Of course, you've seen the ghost candy already. And we've also seen the merry-go-round. These, of course, also have localization. So if you have a specific translation text, you can get that figured out here. There's also the item image. So of course, if your item is going to have some kind of specific icon, we need to have that data stored with it as well. And so what actually manages what items the player has? Well, we also have a player item component. This component is attached to every single individual player. And so it'll have a table storing the inventory of the player. And then we'll have this handle on player loot item event. So this is the event that somebody would call, or whatever you want to do in code to actually grant the player the item. This is what you call, and you're going to make this custom event. Again, we'll kind of get into events in a moment, but there is this customly made on player loot item event. And this is just basically a storage of data that says we have the item ID and then we have the item count. So how many did the player get? Usually it's going to be 1 in this case, but we can set that to multiple. And then the item ID is of course going to be our ghost candy. So here we need to actually find the example of the player getting the item. So currently what we have set up is we have let's go to our tutorial really quickly. Now that we're in our tutorial, you'll go ahead and see, if we go back to our custom made NPC here, this is our character Stanley, you'll see that we can actually change the interaction type to be, let's go to this interaction component. We have the option to make it a give item. Let's go ahead and change this to give item. And you'll see what it does here. It calls the give item. And it's actually just sending this event to the player. It's sending this give item event. It's creating the event. It's setting the ID of the item. It's giving the player 1. We're setting just 1 in this. So let's try to cause Stanley to give the item a little bit early. So let's go ahead and set the interaction type. Specifically, the string is give item. Let's just copy it so it's very specific. And then the target ID, well, what is that item ID? Let's get the merry-go-round early. We're gonna give the player the merry-go-round early. Here. So now we're no longer doing dialogue. This is just gonna give him the item directly. So now instead of talking with Stanley, we're gonna see that he gives us an item as well. You can see that we got that broken merry-go-round early. Now let's really quickly give our player a custom item. Let's make one ourselves. So we can go ahead and go to our item data. And then we're gonna go ahead and add a new item really quickly. We're gonna call this a slime. It's gonna give us a slime item. It's gonna be a quest item. And we're gonna call this item ID. Let's call it the same thing. The item description. The description of the item is just gonna be green slime. And then the item image. So let's find an image really quickly. We can use our new resource searching tool actually. Make this quite easy. let's search for a slime item. Okay, this looks like a very traditional slime item. So let's go ahead and copy the RUID and then we can paste it right into here. Now we're gonna go ahead and want to add localization for this really quickly. So let's go ahead and add that. So we're gonna want to put, this is actually gonna be, let's go back to our item data. So we're gonna have our name ID, that's gonna be slime. And then it's going to be green is the key for that. Let's go ahead and keep it more consistent with what they got going on with the underscores. Keep in mind, these are just keys to the localization. They aren't actually the text themselves. So let's go ahead. And so the source will be, we're just gonna say NA. We're going straight to the localized version, which is gonna be this English. Ideally, you would put your source language in English and then have the Korean and English versions. But for now, we're just gonna put NA. And now we can go ahead and say the slime is green. And then we can also just say that the English version is slime. Cool. We'll go ahead and just put NA for these as well. So now that we have our item data set, we have our item image, these are synced up, this is all good. We call this a quest item. This can be anything, but this is just declaring the type of item that it is. And now let's change it so that's our character. Let's go back to our map, our tutorial stage. And then our NPC Stanley is going to now give slime. Whoops, you can't see that, but there it is. And then, whoops, I need to not launch it here. Let's go back and go to our title screen as it's intended. And then here, we will see Stanley has given us slime. I accidentally added the item sprite here, but you can just ignore that. We'll see we have our slime and our item here and our description here. So we've successfully added an item to the game and we've given it to the player through an interaction. Now that we've actually taken a look at what the quests are, let's go ahead and see how the quests are triggered. So if we go to our player quest component, you'll see here we have data to handle on update to see if the player has completed the quest, if the conditions have been met for the player. And then we will see here on the handle check quest clear event, this is the logic that's actually going to happen when the quest has been completed. This is going to be attached to our player and it's going to kind of function along there. You don't need to know how this works in its entirety, but if you would like, I highly recommend you kind of read through, follow the logic, and try to understand what it is that's actually happening here. So let's go ahead and start our game really quickly. And you'll see here that we actually have, we're going to go and start a new game. So if we go ahead and go to our quest UI, we'll see it pop up in the top right corner. Our first quest is to talk with Stan. So let's go ahead and press E. And you'll see that the quest is automatically updated. If we go to our quest, this is being handled by a quest UI controller. This is very similar to the controller we looked at for the inventory system. It's just going to be checking and updating the quest information as needed. So our player has walked through the portal and now we're going on to our next quest. And the condition has been met. So the to be continued is just to say that we have no more quests remaining. And that was our quote unquote third quest. And that's really everything you need to set up your quest system. You just are going to have to set up an order and then fill out all of the information required. I highly recommend if you do decide to expand on this project that you would take a look and try to build the system a little bit more fleshed out, because right now there's only a single line of quests. Maybe you want multiple quests. Maybe you want to quest a book. All of those things are things to take in consideration and can be done with this project. So next, we're going to talk a little bit more about events. So now I want to go ahead and talk about what an event is. We've been using events a lot through this project. We haven't really explained what an event is. So event is just a passing occurrence in our project. An event happens specifically to an entity. So let's say, for example, we have an event that can happen to our NPC Stan. Let's say he has an event that makes him do a little jump. Well, he would have an event created here called Stan Jump. And when that event is sent to Stan, every component that's in Stan, so like right here, we see if we made a new component, and it could be anything, so that this new component listens to that event. Let's make that event really quick. We might not actually implement the logic for him jumping, but we just want to get the idea down. So let's go ahead and create an event type, and we'll call this Stan Jumps. So here, we have properties and methods. Well, maybe that event we want to pass has like information about how high he jumps. So the height of his jump, and maybe that's just going to be 1 for now. So now we have an event that exists. It's not being called anywhere. It's not even associated with Stan outside of name, but we have this component here. Let's add a handler for it. So we can add a handler for if the Stan Jumps event occurs on Stan. So again, just to reiterate, if I go to NPC Stan, if any bit of code in the entire project sends an event specifically to Stan that this Stan Jumps event occurs, this event will be triggered in any component under Stan that has this handle Stan Jumps handle. So now we can go ahead and say, this is going to be slightly silly, but let's just say self.entity.transform component. And then we'll say his position dot y equals, and then we're going to say itself plus height. So we're just going to add plus, and then we're going to have that event dot height. Again, we're passing in that event information. That's why we made that event. We can have other functionality as well. For now, that is it. So now let's add another method. So when does this event occur? Well, let's see. When do we want Stan to jump? This could be called by absolutely anything, but for this example, we will just do a on map enter. Actually, let's do on begin play would be a little bit better. Let's remove this really quickly. This is going to happen on the server too. So on begin play, we're going to self.entity. And then we're going to send event. So you can do this with any entity. And we're going to actually have to send the event though. So to do that, we're going to have to create the data for the event. So I'm going to call this a jump event. And then we're going to say equals. And then we're going to make a new Stan Jumps event. And then of course we need to declare the property for that. So jump event dot height equals 4. And then we're going to send our jump event. So this is the self calling an event to itself. You don't have to do it. Any different code can send an event to an entity. But in this case, just to make it all clear in one little example, we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, if we did everything correctly, which we might get a little error that we can go ahead and fix, we should see an event be sent to Stan, and we'll see his height increase slightly if he doesn't manage to fall back down. I don't believe Stanley has any physics attached to him. Oh no, he does. So he might fall back down before we see it, but hopefully we'll have a chance to see it. Maybe just to be a little bit careful, we'll add it that he has a big jump. Let's go back to our title screen. And let's click on begin play. And then new game. Well, we could see that he was jumping for just a second, but let's do something a little bit easier. For now, instead of having Stan jump, we'll just go ahead and create a console log. So let's go ahead and go to our new component again, and we'll just say log Stan jumped. And then we'll go ahead and try again really quickly. And we'll see here that the event was triggered. So that's kind of the basis for how events work in MapleStory worlds. You'll see a lot of the components in this example project use that. So if you're a little bit confused, I hope that explained it a little bit more. And next we're going to move on to data storage. So now finally, we're going to go ahead and talk about data storage within this project. So if we go through here, I went ahead and searched for it, but we have our data storage logic. So data storage in MapleStory Worlds is pretty convenient. We will handle all of the data saving on our end, and we'll keep that data saved and secure for you. You just have to learn how to access and save it within your code. So we see here, we have a couple of functions. This is in our data store logic again, to save player data and to load player data. So essentially we'll have here, we're calling the data storage service. Here we're getting the user data storage. So there's multiple different kinds of storage. I recommend you read the documentation to kind of understand the different types, or you can watch one of the videos that we have on this subject. But here we are calling the get user data storage. We're calling the user ID because we're always going to refer to a user ID to get the user specific data. And now we're going to go ahead and set some of the data that we got based off of this. So here we're saving the player data. So we're going to check, okay, what is the last map the player was on? Let's go ahead and save that to the last map name. So this is going to be the key and this is going to be the value. So as soon as we call this, it's going to save and it's going to wait to continue executing, and then it's going to do it. And then same for the position, same for the quest that the player is currently on. Remember, our quests are being handled sequentially at the moment. So it's going to save the last quest that they were on. Not necessarily their progress on the quest, because our quest system is very black and white. It's either done or it's not. And then here, it's going to turn the user's inventory into a string. If you've never heard of JSON before, this is just like a format of holding information and turning that into a string. And then it's going to save that string. And then you'll see here that we pull that back out a little bit later. So now we're on the load player data. So you can see here, again, we're getting that user data storage. We check if it was successful. If it didn't, we stop executing code. I would also personally like to add like a little error here that's saying, hey, we failed to fetch the storage for this user. And you'll see here, actually, we have a response for the error code as well when we try to get each individual item. So here we check, hey, like we couldn't load the last map. Maybe you deleted a map since the last time you had released your world or something like that. You might see this error occur. Or if you just improperly set the map name, or you change the map name, or anything of the sort. So here we'll just see that we're loading all of this information. We're setting the player's coordinates to the position that they were in last. We're changing them to the world that they were in last. We're also resetting back up their individual items. So here we're going to see that we converted their items back from a JSON. So here we'll see JSON decode. This is basically turning that string back into an actual hard table data that we can look at. And then here is just more logic to load that data. We're also registering back up the quest data, assuming that the quest that they were currently on is still valid, and we're checking for that as well. All of these are just additional support functions. These are the core of it, but like we can see here, update client quest data. If we go to that, for example, since we highlighted it here, you'll see it also highlights it here, which is pretty convenient. And you could do more here, but here it's literally just setting the quest ID to be equal to our quest ID. A lot of these are fairly simple like that, but you could do more logic and expand it as your system got more complicated. And that covers the basis for the data saving in this project. But again, I really recommend you take a look at the documentation. There's multiple different types of data storage, one per player, one per game, one per creator, all sorts of stuff like that that can be really helpful for your project. There's also different types, like we can, here we're setting and waiting, but we can also set and then continue executing code. We don't have to wait. That can be really helpful for performance reasons. And then same with the loading as well. We can load asynchronously. Before we finish our data saving for the project, we will look at our example one final time, just to see again and reiterate what it is our code is doing. So we click that new game and decided not to load any of our previous logic. And we'll see here, we're just ignoring our quest for now. And then we save here. And now, when we decide to reload the game, We press that continue game, all of our data is loading, and that load takes a second because of course we're doing the get and wait, which implies that we have to wait for the server to finish, and then it correctly sets our player position to the correct map and area that they were in. With this, we've looked at all the features in the Adventure Sample World project and how to implement them. The purpose of this was just to give you a bare minimum guide, but to build something more advanced, I really recommend you take a look at our other resources and our other videos to get started. That being said, that's it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you're able to use this to make even more interesting worlds.